Good afternoon. Well, I appreciate you taking some time with me today.
Hey Bryce, good to see you.
Nice to see you again as well. Well, I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned earlier in class, and that was how to engage students more fully in the lesson and what we're going over, and how pedagogy and our teaching practices relate to engagement.
Fantastic. It's one of the things at this point in my career that I really love talking about. I've been at this a while, over 35 years, and my love for teaching can be summarized in one word, and that word is engage. I have expressed to your class my passion that as instructors we need to engage the learners. As we chat about this, I'm going to make reference to an excellent book. It's by Ken Bain, What the Best College Teachers Do. And so Bain has really influenced my thinking and helped me refine my articulation on this topic. I'm going to mention five terms, some of which may be familiar to you and some of which may be new. So as I go through and mention these, you feel free to stop me or ask for further clarification or if you need some illustrations. So as we talk about engagement, I'm going to mention terms schema, metacognition, active learning, formative assessment, and reflective practice. How many of those five would you say are familiar to you?
At this point in my career, all of them. But,
All of them?
I'm sure you can enlighten me more on each and every one of those terms. So.
Terrific. Let's begin the conversation with a basic definition. What do we mean by teaching and learning? This is foundational, and as you think about how you approach classroom experience, whether it's online or whether it's in person, the definition that you hold to is really significant. So my definition of teaching and learning can be summed up in one word, and that word is change. During an instructional episode, if change does not happen in the learner, I argue teaching and learning did not take place. This could be change of perspective, change in attitude, it could be a change of comprehension, could be resulting in ultimately a change in behavior. But if no change takes place, then I would say no teaching, no learning took place in the process. And this brings us back to the concept of engagement. When you think of engagement, I argue that it is far superior to have your students actively engage versus sitting passively. By passive, I mean that they are listening to what's now often been referred to as sage on stage, and I'm trying to give the hook to the sage on stage and have students actively involved. Even sitting and taking notes is very passive, and so I will very much would like to see you incorporate more active learning techniques in your approach to teaching and learning. First, let's consider the schema of the learners. As you approach new content, think about where the student's coming from. Do they have a background? Do they have categories of the mind? Or maybe more simply put, do they have buckets in which they can place the new content that you're going to expose them to? The research says that if they have no place to put the new ideas, then it's going to be stuck in short-term memory, or it's just not going to be in their consciousness at all. It may be in their notebooks, but they're not going to remember it they're not going to be able to use it, and they certainly won't be confident about their use of the material. So considering the student's schema, where they're coming from, prior learning experiences, that's extremely important.
Maybe one illustration for schema and where you changed your teaching, different kind of change, but where you changed your teaching to meet your students where we were in class was when you were talking about a basketball coach and everyone was staring at you blankly, and I think only one student in the class had heard of the basketball coach.
And I thought it was a brilliant idea, but it failed miserably.
You changed, I think, to Bill Belichick because everyone was considerably more familiar with football, and Bill Belichick's a big name in football, and so you carried your illustration through using Bill Belichick as opposed to the basketball coach's name.
That is an excellent illustration, and I hope I demonstrated good pedagogy with making that change. And behind the concept of engagement is you have to think on your feet and be ready to make adjustments. Let's move to the second term. So we are still in the preparation for class concept, and that is metacognition. As an instructor, as a professor, I want to challenge you to think about your thinking. How did you learn the material? What pieces of the material were difficult for you to learn? What pieces of the material perhaps were in conflict with prior learning? And this goes back to schema as you consider where the students are and perhaps material that they learned in high school, maybe from different settings. If you have a perception or an anticipation that they are perhaps will be confused by your presentation, think about your thinking, think about their thinking, and have an anticipation of how you're going to present the material so that they will be able to grasp it. Another term in education is cognitive dissonance. There's going to be occasions where there's fighting going on in the head, where you're encountering new ideas, you're exposed to new perspectives, and in the head of the learner, there's friction going on. We want to enable them to have this friction, this iron sharpens iron experience, and come away with a way to accommodate or assimilate new material.
So is that accommodation and assimilation the change that you were referring to before? Could that be one of the changes, or are there other changes that might take place as well?
Absolutely, and let me refine this a little bit. When we speak of accommodation, we speak of creating a new schema, a new category. Assimilation, we're talking about existing experiences, existing schemata in the mind, and you take new ideas and you attach to that which is already there. Moving to our third point, we want to consider active learning in your pedagogy within the classroom. So you've thought about where the students are coming from. You have thought about your thinking and perhaps anticipated their thought processes. During your presentation, during your lecture, you want to invite them to think seriously about new concepts. Give them moments where they can turn and express their thoughts, their understanding to a classmate, listen to a classmate, and then take a few moments and have some of those ideas expressed for the full audience. That's called think, pair, share. There are many ideas related to active learning, and in another conversation we'll expand on those. I mentioned formative assessment. As you go through your lesson plan, as you go through class activities, plan moments where you stop during class challenge the students to express their level of understanding. Have you experienced that in any of your classes?
Absolutely. So where we may pause for a brief activity where you have distributed sticky notes in a very well structured active learning design and asked us to come up with various methods to approach research questions or critical questions for dissertations. We would then take those sticky notes, our responses to your prompts, and put them under various categories on the board where we are walking around the room, talking, and it's a very free-flowing sort of time, but at the end you would walk through and summarize, providing feedback for us on whether or not the research methods would be a valid way to approach the question at hand.
Terrific. Another great illustration from my class, and you have tied together that which is important to the student, your dissertation and prior research. You have also connected that to active learning. The student is not only using formative assessment, but he's also up, moving around, interacting with the content, the professor, and fellow students. Finally, a fifth point in this discussion is extremely important and often overlooked, and that is reflective practice. Reflective practice is the activity that the professor employs after the lecture is over, where he or she sits down and thinks about what took place in class today, what were the approaches, the assessments, the pedagogies, which were the ones that were successful. Where in the class did the energy sort of leave the room? Where in the class were students floundering? Reflective practice, I argue, is that which stands between a teacher being successful or a teacher for 30 years being a first-year teacher. In other words, repeating the same material and the same approaches over and over, year after year, without demonstrating professional growth. So we've talked about schema, metacognition, we've talked about active learning, formative assessment, and reflective practice. I want to pause for a second and see if you could put those 5 words or 5 phrases together in a sentence to demonstrate to me your understanding.
Thank you again for your time.